This is the introduction to our second unit this semester, and it's important to keep in mind that throughout the semester we'll be carrying over key concepts from one unit to the next. Now that first unit, of course, we dug into the whole idea that Appalachia can be defined in a number of different ways. But there's two key concepts you need to carry over from that first unit into the second unit that make life a little easier. First of all is the notion that the idea of Appalachia has a history apart from the social fact of Appalachia. I find that when students get that out of the way and when they have a good grip on that concept, it frees us from looking for specific concrete things that define the region throughout all times and all periods. They just simply don't exist in such a way. Second key concept, and I did ask you to paraphrase the concept in your first quiz, and that is the whole idea of postmodern Appalachia. John Alexander Williams says that it's processes and interactions between people and between those people and the environment more so than any specific trait goes to define Appalachia, and that our idea of Appalachia ought to change, and our definition of Appalachia ought to change as the region itself changes. Now let's press on to Unit 2. The second unit will start into a historical analysis of Appalachia, which will continue on throughout the rest of the semester. And the first part of this historic analysis is the frontier period of Appalachia, a period of time that runs roughly from the first settlement of English and German-speaking peoples into the Appalachian, what was then the Appalachian frontier, in and around the 1700s, early 1700s, and carries us all the way up through the removal of Cherokee Indians by 1840. So it's a pretty significant period of time. But again, going back to John Alexander Williams' concept of postmodern Appalachia, let's look for a couple of the key processes, major historic processes that hold together this big period of time as one discrete era of Appalachian history. And really, there are a couple processes, and this unit is characterized by two main processes. First, this period of time is all about the diversity of people who met, interacted, and in some cases warred with one another in the Appalachian frontier. Now, and the diversity of this period is really quite astounding for somebody who may not be familiar with it. The thing to do to really get a grip on this process is to start off the unit by making a list with 3 columns in it. Okay? First column all the way on the left, identify all the different peoples, the groups who had a vested interest in settling or somehow controlling the land west of the Allegheny Ridge or the Appalachian territory. And you'll notice, and if you make your list right, you'll notice that your list ought to contain some nations, right? Some colonies and later states, of course, after the Revolution. You ought to be able to list out at least 2 different tribes of Native Americans, a bunch of different settlers who even then we could divide up by ethnicity. So it should be a fairly long list. Now do notice that you may not have a lot of information for all the different people or groups or nations or states on that list, but at least it's important to get them listed out. Okay. Column after that, describe how their interaction with Appalachia or how their interest in Appalachia changed over time. What were some of the key changes? What were some of the key interactions that affected that group or state or nation? And finally, on the third list, continuing across for each group, identify their ultimate fate in the Appalachian frontier by the time the period ends in 1840. It's a good way to organize all the different groups and people into this list. Later on in a second video, I'll point out where you can identify these people and read about them in your assigned reading. But it is clear, though, that by and we can't put exact date on it, but certainly by the close of the Revolution, though, that English-speaking white people would come to dominate the region of Appalachia, which brings us to the second main process we'll deal with in this unit. And that is how those English-speaking white people, and in some cases there are German-speaking or even a couple other different ethnicities in the region, but predominantly English-speaking white people, adapted their particular culture to the environment of Appalachia. Now, we've already read a little bit about this in the chapter on folk life, how white people took from the Cherokee, for example, the art of basket weaving, a vast store of knowledge about herbal medicines, dancing. So there's quite a bit that you could go back and look at that chapter on folk life and bring over into this unit as well. But for our purposes here, though, as for this unit, we'll take a look at a couple other different types of adaptations that these people made to the Appalachian environment. And in those adaptations, you have to bear in mind two key things about the forces that forced adaptation onto these people. Number one of which is that these people moved into a territory that had very unreliable access to, in many cases, unreliable markets. In other words, it was a region in which transportation was poor. So they had to structure their lives in such a way that they weren't necessarily market-oriented, although if they could get things to the market, they would. A second thing is that you have to understand that these people moved into what we now know as the virgin forest. Now, it is known that Native Americans shaped the forest in a number of different ways by using burnings and clearings. The Appalachian forest had been shaped and manipulated for millennia. However, by the time the settlers of the white English-speaking settlers arrived in Appalachia, that forest was largely intact. In other words, it hadn't been cleared in any industrial, systematic way. So the trees were just simply huge. And it's certainly, even when people began to settle the Appalachian region, some thought that the forest was so immense and so powerful that it would never be cleared. Later on in the semester, we'll see, though, that wasn't the case at all. Between 1880 and 1920, that forest was, in fact, cleared. But these two forces, the fact that they were living in a virgin forest and that they had poor transportation to markets that were sketchy for most of the period, forced these people to adapt their culture to meet that particular circumstances. And the way the social and cultural results of that can be seen in a number of different ways. You'll be reading about the culture of pioneer settlers, including their religion. We do have a chapter on religion this unit, but also their household economy was in fact shaped by these influences. So this period of time, again, it stretches out a lot. There's a lot of exciting things that go on in this period. We could take a look at the ways in which these different groups in the frontier affected one another through influencing or through borrowing cultures and trading culture back and forth. But also this period is exciting because there's a lot of wars. Some of the wars you may know about. The American Revolution, 1775, 76, and all that. The American Revolution had a profound effect on Appalachia. One war that some may know, but some may not be familiar with, that happened before the Revolution, 20 years before the Revolution. Of course, the French Indian War also had a tremendous impact, and it makes for good reading and some pretty exciting events that we'll look at this unit. Alright, in another video I will cover the assigned reading and point out some of the key themes in those readings you should be watching for.